All right, we're going. Take it away.
All right, great. So this is the third out of 4 conversations on case histories. Just a very brief review. The first, because what we're dealing with these case histories is to look at the advantages of the Feldenkrais method for working with people with complex issues, and sometimes in the vein of physical integrity, sometimes in the vein of emotional dignity, always in the vein of what is health. It's not so common for us to think in terms of working with the questions of emotional dignity as a Feldenkrais practitioner in the way that the Feldenkrais method is currently advertised and more or less known in the public. Most people think of the work as a movement work to refine and to make movement simpler, easier, more efficient for people, but not necessarily to look at the profound effects that the work has on enabling people to live their life with a higher quality, with greater emotional dignity. So the first the first lesson that I worked with was with a woman that I talked about. The first case study was with a woman who had become phobic about sitting in the passenger seat of a car. She'd been in a car wreck, a really quite horrific car wreck, but had suffered no real physical injury in the car wreck, but found that it was almost impossible to sit in the car seat. So the question before me at that point in time was how to help her find the means of being collected and composed, and to find the means of being quiet in herself in such a way that she could find a greater value of quiet rather than what her mind was producing, the way that her mind was producing fearful thoughts, and the way that she was, quote, being triggered by taillights and by by being in the situations on highways and 2-lane roads. So it really was my work with her to have her find out that she could find within herself and continue to return to a profound sense of being collected within herself, by which when she became overly active and agitated and anxious, find the means back to being calm. So that was the first case study. The second case study was with a woman who had a botched cesarean and ended up in the emergency room with after having been not being believed by doctors or with her husband that she was in the state of emergency that she was in. So she had not only the physical injury of 2 surgeries to her lower abdominal wall, but she had, again, this horrific kind of emotional response and profound fear that she first of all, she was told over and over again by the people that she worked with that she would never reestablish her ability to regain her core, whatever that means. It's something that's still elusive to me, but I understand that it's something that is considered to be important in some aspects of the world. I don't understand core in the way that people understand core. I understand that the tonification of muscles is completely related to how we find support within ourselves. And when we have proper support, then that proper support is spread throughout the whole of ourselves in the ways that we do. I believe that people need to have core ability rather than core stability. And so, so my work with her was to help her, one, find a sense that she didn't have to cover up, that she really did have a quality within herself that was beautiful. And so that she came from being really internally scared and withdrawn into a place of being able to sit, have her breath return, and find that she actually had significant capabilities with her ability to organize her ability to walk, to move, to lift her legs, to do all the things, to do rollbacks in sitting, things that she was told by her physical therapist that she would never recover. We helped her recover and helped her recover a sense that she could move forward back to the place where she's actually considering having another child, and was hopefully that she'll have a child with a natural childbirth. So that brings us to the third case, which is a person that I'm calling RG. Nikki says her internet is going in and out, so she has disappeared. So, okay, hi Nikki, maybe you'll come and go. Okay, so RG is a decathlete. He's an Olympic decathlete. He's not a a high school pentathlete. He's an Olympic decathlete. I'm not going to tell you his name. You guys, if you wanted to do enough research, you could figure it out. And I don't think it's very important. But the thing is that this is a person who competes in the Olympics in 10 different events. And it's probably considered to be the most athletic of all of the Olympic events, in the sense that he's got anywhere from 100 to 220 to 440 to 1500 meter runs. He throws the shot, he throws the discus, he high jumps, and he pole vaults. And I think that that's close to 10. I think that there might be one or two other events that he participates in. The events are scored on points, and the question is the one who ends up with the most points at the end of the event. And he's actually not competing against the other competitors. He's competing against time and heights. And so he's absolutely competing in order to have the highest number of points that possible. And there's a point scoring system for each of the events. And his specialty is the high jump. Actually, it's probably his best event, but he's also an extraordinary 1500 meter runner. And is also very, very good. Oh, he throws the discus and he throws the javelin. And he's a very good javelin thrower as well. So those are the 10 events. And he came to me as a result of a serendipity, basically. He's friends with a person who I once gave a lesson to, and he was having a significant difficulty with a groin injury in his lower left groin. And for whatever reason, this person that I gave one lesson to said, you should see Jeff Haller. And for whatever reason, this person followed up. And that's not usually the case with me. I mean, oftentimes people have to have heard of me 3 or 4 or 5 different times. They have to have had exposure to the work. But in this case, for whatever reason, he did come for a session. He was only come for a few sessions. He was in the process of getting ready for the World Cup. And so he was trying to get enough qualifying points for the World Cup. And so he was getting ready for an event, and he was having significant difficulty with his, like I said, a lower groin injury. Now, if we go back into his injury history, we can find that it's remarkable that he's able to compete at the level that he has. He's had bilateral hernia, sports hernia operations. And I don't know if you know, but in the modern day sports hernia operation, they use a mesh, a Gore-Tex mesh that is not elastic. It's not like our own tissue. They find that it's easier that they have less recurrence from these injuries, but it does affect the mobility of the lower abdomen. If you have worked with people who've had this thing, and oftentimes there's pretty significant soreness that remains for long, long periods of time following these kinds of surgeries and these kind of procedures. He had ACL reconstruction on his left knee. He had significant ankle injuries to both ankles. So where do you start with a person of this caliber athlete? And so what would be the first thing you would want to see? What would you look at? What would you look for? And especially when you recognize and we have to recognize that in every injury, whether it be emotional or physical, the body will compensate. And the compensation is not one that says that is non-contractive. It is always contractive. There is always compensation, and that kind of contraction means that the person increases their muscle tone to protect themselves from further injury, and to and to prevent further pain. Now, without intervention, the compensation becomes a part of the way that they organize themselves. And no matter, and I can say this, and I can say this with real clarity for myself, that for the most part, the physical therapy exercises that they go through, and please understand, I'm not an advocate to say that the Feldenkrais method is the only way to handle all of these injuries. There are brilliant practitioners and brilliant people, and there are brilliant processes and procedures out there. There are advantages to this work, the Feldenkrais work, that we have an intimate way of helping people find a function and a capacity within them that they may not find in these other circumstances. So when he explained to me the things that he had done with physical therapy, the kinds of exercises, the kinds of processes, he had engaged in a process called Airosti, A-I-R-R-O-S-T-I, Airosti, which is basically using foam rollers to roll out the fascia in order to make basically it's rolfing with your own foam roller. And the idea is that if you turn the fascia into a gelatinous substance, the musculature can move through a longer range of motion. He had been through countless hours of physical therapy exercises and stretching activities. He's a track person, so what do you think track people do? They stretch. Even though it's becoming more understood in the track world and in the physical therapy world that stretching does not necessarily lead to an increase in performance, nor does it help. It doesn't arrest the process of inflammation post competition. It doesn't decrease the soreness. And I think it's pretty well known in most people that when you talk to them now, they're no longer interested in stretching, especially ballistic stretching, that they're much more interested in some kind of dynamic movement processes that take people through a range of motion that are related directly to the activity they're going to participate in. So he had been through an awful lot of work, but the main kind of work that he'd been doing was basically exercises to strengthen his glute medius. He had been involved with what we can understand as localizing to, hi Ritz, has been a long time since I've seen you. Localizing muscles, testing the muscle for weakness, comparing the musculature bilaterally from one side to the other, and testing for what is commonly called muscular instability, muscular weakness. There are other asymmetry, muscular asymmetry. There are different terms that are used in the physical therapy world. So, but no one had looked very carefully at how he walked, how he stood, where the forces, how he transmitted force from his feet through his skeleton to his head. And we have to recognize that in every single case, with every injury, the compensation leads to some kind of way in which a muscular inefficiency, that the force does not go through the skeleton as cleanly, purely, as efficiently as possible. That the compensation, which means the maintenance of some form of muscular habit and fascial habit, the way that they form a new shape within themselves and it's held, leads to it arrests efficiency. It arrests the clearest, most dynamic path that movement can take place through the skeleton. So where do you start? Where do you start? Yeah, Ginny, where would you start? I see you shaking your head. Where would you start?
I don't know. I guess I was thinking the first thing is where he doesn't move, as you can, where things, how things travel through him. And so then maybe it might not be skeletal, but you can see the direction that he's compensating for and see that. So, but I don't know where to start. This is fascinating.
Yeah, well, that's a great answer, isn't it? So one of the things that we understand as Feldenkrais practitioners is that good posture means the ability to move in any direction without hesitation or preparation. Yeah. Now, most of us as Feldenkrais practitioners aren't specifically trained relative to the different forms of athleticism that we might meet. We don't necessarily know how to work with a track player or a golfer or a basketball player or the kinds of things that particular martial artists are going to have when they come in. Or if you're even in stage combat or any of these kind of things, we might understand the kinds of expressions that people make in acting. We might understand the necessity for mobility and support for a musician, but to actually work with people that are in their bodies in these ways, we may not have had that kind of background where we look as to how will we help them relative to the function of what they have to produce. Yeah. So your answer is a great answer. And there's no question that I mean, it's a classic Feldenkrais answer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And again, this is not to be in any way pejorative or demeaning. It's just a particular way that we as Feldenkrais practitioners over the years have learned to look at things. Can we help a person find a more simple way or an easier way to move in areas that they have difficulty in? Mm-hmm. And expect that the brain will take that and transpose that into supporting them in their function. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so that's a great answer. And so you might look, and is it looking, or do you do that by touching? Is it a kinesthetic sense? Is it something that how do you take the person in so that you can do that? Yeah.
I would have better luck touching and going with the skeleton and moving through. I wish I knew more in watching people walk. I think that's fascinating, and it would behoove me to learn that.
Yeah, yeah. I happen to know where I'll sell it unabashedly. I happen to know where there's a video course called Perspectives on Walking, in which the entire video.
I caught that on your website. I might look into that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's perspectives. I don't know the rule. I don't know anything about walking any better than anybody else. I just know how to take ideas from the Feldenkrais method and to utilize those methods as a ways of how do we study the process of walking.
Good.
Okay, great. So go ahead, Russ. Tell me what might you look for?
Having a surgery where something's been implanted that considerably restricts his lower abdominal flexibility. So I was wondering if one of the things to look for was to see how he's compensating in order to breathe and how that then affects his walking. Because if that's as rigid as you've described, then his prior breathing pattern has got to be shot all to hell. He'll have to be doing something else to compensate for that thing being inside him.
There's no question about that. And I would say that would be secondary in my way of thinking, but that's true. The question again always is, how does the person maintain the easiest and clearest sense of tone within themselves? The deficit in a person's breath will certainly be found in every single case where a person's been in some form of compensation, and especially in this case where his lower abdomen, especially as you understand from the martial arts perspective in studying hara and studying the kinds of things that we study in the martial arts, the power and the necessity of having access to the lowest part of the abdomen and the lowest part of the pelvis, the highest part of the pelvis, but the lowest part of the abdomen, for having really, really sustainable power, internal power. So yes, there was a clear relationship. There's no doubt that he was unable to actually access the entire capability of his lower abdomen for expanding and contracting to support his breath. But the question is he has to be able to be in a position where he can find the support so that the muscle tone can be available to him. Now he can find it lying on the table, and this is Moshe's greatest genius, but it's not. Moshe stole it from Freud. You have to understand that Freud had already taken the situation where he understood that the anti-gravity musculature, the reflexes for being upright, were based on the relationship of the feet in contact with the ground and the way that people had acquired their relationship to gravity and the way that they'd been conditioned by gravity. Yeah. So one of Freud's greatest understandings as a neurologist was that he took people off of their feet so that their feet were not in contact with the ground, and the way that they had learned to maintain the muscular habit of supporting themselves was not engaged. Now, as soon as that takes place, for Freud's point of view, is that led people into the opportunity to free associate, because Freud understood that people's compulsions and their anxieties and their insecurities and their neurosis are hidden in their muscular habit. So if you lie a person down and so that they're not engaged in that same muscular habit, then something else is opened. Feldenkrais took the exact same idea. He said if we take people and have them lie down in the field of gravity so that the support of the floor is so great that the muscular habit becomes quiet, then that entire aspect of the way that the brain maintains an architecture, a sense of how to support a person in gravity, becomes quiet, thus making it available for new learning. Whole new pathways can become possible, and because one is not overly wrought or overly bound to maintaining the muscular habit of being upright, it means that they can make discriminations because they can be sensitive to themselves in a way that they can't when they're within their muscular habit. The muscular habit of maintaining oneself upright in gravity means that you have to maintain a sense of security in order to hide the anxiety. And people do that through stabilizing themselves and maintaining that particular way of supporting themselves that they get well used to, even though it's harmful to themselves. So Moshe took that from Freud. He just transposed. He changed the idea, because Moshe wasn't interested in people's free association. He was interested in creating the highest potential for people to find new ways of connecting movement so that they could function at a higher level, and to do it through a much higher level of discrimination. So Moshe, the question then became, in the field of gravity, what is a person's way of supporting themselves in gravity? So we can refer back to Ginny. She had an idea. She wanted to look at the question of where does a person not move? We can look at Russ's idea, and we can say that, that we could see that as we become more expert at practitioners, we can look to see the deficit that a person has in whether their breath is really free for them or not. And we learn to look at that, and we learn to sense it. We learn to touch them and invite to look. But let's not forget that in the field of gravity, that from the very beginning, as a child, as we're introduced to living in the field of gravity with a nervous system that is meant to engage in the field of gravity and to acquire its behavior. And I've told last time, and I told the time before, that we're the only animal that has to acquire our relationship to gravity. That means not only gravity, but to our culture, to our society, to our family values, to our educational values. All of our behavior is acquired, and we can say without hesitation that we are conditioned by the world of gravity. Without gravity, there would be no reason for culture. Without gravity, there would be no reason for society. Without gravity, there would be no reason to function. Without gravity, there would be no reason to have a structure. So we can say without hesitation that we are conditioned by the field of gravity. So when we look at that, and we start to see then the way in which a person is not only conditioned by the field of gravity and adjusts and maladjusts themselves to the field of gravity, then we can look to see very clearly, with all of the injuries that a person has, how do they support themselves? How do they stabilize themselves? Now, orientation is absolutely crucial to human beings. It's crucial to every biological organism. Yeah? Knowing where you are in space. The ability to orient means that I have the capacity to anticipate change in the environment so that I can continue to maintain my orientation. This is like a central tenet, a central pillar to the Feldenkrais method. The relationship to orientation. It means that your central nervous system, your brainstem, your inner ear, the way your eyes are organized, the way that all of your proprioceptive receptors are organized, the way that they've been trained in order for you to be able to maintain an upright posture through long apprenticeship that none of you failed at because none of you had significant enough lesions or significant enough difficulty to make it so that you couldn't go from the stage of being from the birth to crawling, to rolling, to crawling, to walking, to being upright, to participating in the activities. That doesn't mean we mastered being upright, but we moved to the upright position in a way that for most of us is just good enough. But the thing that most of us didn't realize is that for in most cases, our way of being in gravity has within it, for most of us, falling. That we don't really utilize our skeleton to counteract the force of gravity, to negate the force of gravity. That somewhere within us, in our gait, in our movement, we make movements in which to stabilize ourselves, to keep ourselves from falling in the field of gravity. And so when I'm watching this athlete, what did I say, RG, GR, RG? When I'm watching RG, I'm looking for where he's unstable. I'm looking for where he's compensating, where he's falling. Where is it that he has to utilize because his nervous system absolutely will not let him fall. A nervous system that will let a person who's walking across the floor fall is a damaged nervous system. There's something really, really wrong with that system. They have a lesion of some sort, either whether it's at the spinal cord or whether it's in the brainstem or whether they have a lesion in some place higher in the cortex. If they have that sort, they've had that sort of stroke, they've had a transverse myelitis, they've had multiple sclerosis, they have ALS, whatever it is, where they've lost the ability to control their orientation in space. For anybody else who doesn't have these difficulties, if you touch them, if you push them, and you haven't pushed them so hard that they actually have to fall, then they will right themselves. If they start to roll their ankle when they're walking on a path and there's rocks and roots and they roll their ankle a little bit, their system is built to right them, to bring them immediately back to being upright. And so you can look at all the ATM lessons where Moshe asked you to go move your legs slowly down to the side and pop, quickly bring yourself back to the middle, and slowly down and quickly back to the middle. And there are many lessons like that where Moshe will ask a person to go slowly to the side and come back to the middle. He's utilizing this central tenet, this central process within ourselves to return back to the middle. And there are faster pathways. And I can't be the physiologist who tells you that, other than the fact that I know that the pathways to return to being upright are faster than the pathways to fall. There's the righting process. It's so low in the brainstem and it's so closely related to the spine that everything in the system will bring itself to being upright unless you've gone so far that your center of balance, your center of mass is past your ability to recover, and then you'll fall. Or if you're skillful, you'll roll. Yeah. Now you have to be extraordinarily skillful to take something that looks like a fall and turn it into a roll. Yeah. Now, so then the question is, and for most people, if we study their gait and we study their way of moving and they study their way of being in gravity and in the environment, we'll see, and even when we study ATM, awareness through movement, really carefully, in most cases we'll find that even when a person is lying on the floor, that, say for example, I've asked you to lift your leg, and then I ask you to put your leg down, and your foot is a half an inch from the floor. And when you recognize that your foot is close to the floor, most people will actually drop their foot that last half inch and they'll fall. And if they pay close attention, they'll realize that there will be a subtle change in their breath. because no matter how far you fall, your system must protect itself from falling. And the protection from falling is not the protection of going, wow, great, I'm happy to fall. It is a contraction in the system and a holding of the breath. It's a preparation for the system to be shocked and to prevent the shock and to protect against the shock. So for me, then, the question of working with this athlete was, when does he fall? Because I can guarantee to you that if he falls in his gait when he's walking, and you can guarantee that when someone has had two sprained ankles, ACL reparation of a knee, a groin injury, and two lower abdomen surgeries, that the person falls. You can absolutely guarantee it, because there's nothing in the world, no matter what his practice is, no matter if it's Aikido, it might find it in Tai Chi, you could imagine finding it in dance, but the fact of the matter is that I have found in the highest level Tai Chiists, people that have studied Tai Chi for 40 years, the highest level of dance, which means people that I have a client who danced in the Hamburg Ballet, and when she finished her career in Hamburg, they filled the stage with roses for her before she went to the New York City Ballet and before she finished her career here in the Seattle Ballet. And I can guarantee to you that it's a funny thing, but this is the highest, one of the people who danced at the absolute highest level of dance, and she falls. She didn't know that she fell. She covered it beautifully. But somewhere within her organization, there was a fall. And she had a sore hip. And it was on the side that she fell in. What are the ways of falling? So what I want to do is take a few moments, and I'll pull the other camera up, and I'll try to demonstrate a few of the ways that people fall. And I probably have to take my shoes off, but I don't know if you'll be able to see, but I'll do my best to show so I can give you some ideas, because it's endemic. And in general, and this is a huge generalization, it's not always the case, but when we study people very carefully, we'll see in most parts, the general public that I work with, they'll either fall all the time. They'll fall when they land on their left foot, and they'll fall when they land on their right foot. Or they'll fall on one side and lift on the other, come away from the ground. They'll utilize the ground forces through their skeleton. Or they'll do something really interesting. They'll lift and they'll lift, but almost never do I find that. I almost never find that level of organization in people, where they have the quiet quality within themselves that they're continually canceling gravity. And I'm going to say this as a kind of a koan for you, that canceling gravity is not just the gravitational field that pulls us into the ground. It's canceling that in this particular way of walking, we cancel our history. We cancel the way that we've maintained the muscular habit of our anxiety and insecurity. There's something about a person who walks with this kind of lightness that has a demeanor that's generally very kind and very open, and they have a quality to themselves that's a different kind of presence than someone who is falling. Falling brings us to a profound, quiet, damaging, so subtly damaging, we don't even know it's happening, sense of insecurity, that our system somehow knows that in each step we take, we have to recover, we have to stabilize. And there's some sense that we know within ourselves that we're not completely safe in the environment. It's a subtle, it's erosive, it's glacially erosive. But you watch what happens as people age, and as they get older and older, where the fear of falling begins to exacerbate what's already taking place within them. And at that point in time, we'll see that as people age, their greatest fear is of falling. Yeah. So, and we have the ability to profoundly help people find a greater sense of internal security and to cancel gravity. And in that sense, in this koan, in the sense of the koan, cancel the way that they organize themselves through their entire life experience. All right, so let's see if I can fix the camera for a moment so that we can look at a few of the ways that people fall, and so some of the clues that we can look at for falling. Doesn't mean that we're going to have here the ability to know what to do when people fall, but it's important for us to have at least a beginning sense of how important it is to observe people as they fall and when they fall. So, everybody's on board for this? Any questions before I start? Is this making sense? Yes, no? Yeah? Great. See, I'm not saying anything new, obviously. Yeah? But the question is for us as practitioners is to actually be able to be in the state where our abilities to observe and watch are clear. Ritz, let me go ahead, I'll mute you. Go ahead.
You were asking, did you have any questions? And I was just going, no, trying to give you a thumbs up, but I'm still learning my way around Zoom.
That's why you raised your hand. Okay. Great. Thanks. All right, let me just change the camera for a moment. Give me a second. Ta-da! Isn't this great? All of a sudden, I can sit here in my room. I can talk with 15 or 20 people from around the world. Ritz, are you still in New Zealand, Ritz?
Yes, I am, but at the moment I'm house sitting for my sister in Queensland, where it's about 15 degrees warmer.
Oh, yes, you certainly are. Right, well, so all the way to Australia in our moment here. Hang on a second. Hang on a second. Let me see if I can get this angled in such a way that I can. Oh, shoot. Sorry. I didn't mean to do that. Did it come back on? Damn it.
No, you're black.
I can see that I'm black. Let's see if I can get me hooked back up again. There we go. I'm back again, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Would it be helpful if I understood all these things? All right. I'm going to take off my shoes here for a moment. It would seem like I would know in advance how to do this, but I never know quite what I'm going to do or how I'm going to do it. I'm hoping that the view will be specific enough. I don't have anybody around that I can. All right. So let me see if I get close enough. I have to be here. I'll start off with this. Gosh,
red.
I just turned red. Sorry. All right. So I hope you can see this clearly enough. Right now I'm standing more or less in such a way that I'm maintaining my arches. So you can see that I'm not collapsed inward. Yeah? Now it's crucial for us to understand that I'm also not rolled so far out that I'm bow-legged. I'm lifted the inner part of my arch. The question, of course, is how do I find the exact points of contact for where my foot has the highest level of architecture? And there are lots of different places. If you go to Jeff Haller on YouTube, there's different talks that I've given about the foot and in the various workshops that I've taught. But more or less, I'm standing in such a way that I have a clear sense that I am standing over my arches. Now, if you watch me from the side, it's very interesting. I'm standing over my arches, but it's very interesting. I'm not leaning forward. If I lean forward, and you can try this for yourself, if you stand in whatever way you stand, and you can play with this for a moment, and if you just simply lean forward and start to pay attention to what happens to your feet, what happens to your toes the moment you simply lean forward. It means you move your center of mass forward. Watch what happens to your toes. Watch how they become engaged. Find out if your toes begin to curl against the floor to keep you from falling. Now, that's falling. Now, it's a funny thing to call that falling, but here I am. If I'm in this position, I'll move out far enough, or I'll move close enough. There's not enough. But if I'm in a position where I'm just simply leaning forward, let me do this. I'm sorry, I'd love to have, let's see if I can make this space bigger. Shoot. Sorry. So let me just hop in here. I can't even find myself. I'm over here. If I go out here, okay, I got to go the other direction. There we go. So if I'm out here far enough and I'm just falling forward, all of you can find out, don't your toes start to crinkle against the floor? Now, that's falling. You can sense that the moment your toes grasp the floor, that you're engaging yourself to keep yourself from falling. Yeah? Now, it's a funny thing. If I simply leave my heels glued to the floor and begin to glide forward a little bit with the sensation that there's a weight that's staying glued on, my heels staying glued to the floor, instead of falling forward, I'm actually balancing my center of gravity over my feet. My feet want to do something completely different. And you find out whether your feet begin to spread. Now, this is an important thing, because for an athlete, if the moment that I start my running process and I lean forward and my feet grab, then in that moment, my system, everything in my back and in my legs is actually working at that same moment to keep me from falling. It's tonifying itself to work to pull me back up. So I'm already, as an athlete, working against myself, unless I know how to begin the movement in such a way that for every action I make, I have an equal and opposite action. Something that must be engaged relative to the floor so that my center of mass stays against myself. In that movement, when I land, the question then is, did I land on my left foot in such a way that as I made the movement, did I land on my left foot in such a way that I went down into my foot? Or did I land on my foot in such a way that I begin to, the moment I touch the floor, you can watch me. Am I lifting from the floor, or am I falling into the floor? And you can play with this for yourself. If you walk across the floor, you can find out on which foot is it that you tend to get taller on, and on which foot is it that you tend to fall into. Now, how do we fall? When you watch athletes, take a moment, just walk and see if you can notice for yourself whether you tend to fall into one foot and get taller on one foot. Just take a few steps and notice that when you go from step to step. Yeah. Whether there's some sense that when you make the movement, whether you fall or whether you stay upright, whether you lift yourself. Now, everybody find for yourself, is it observable? Is it immediately available for you to grasp it? Or is it nebulous? Is it somehow far away from you? So, this particular athlete, so there are many ways to fall. If you watch my left foot, I could come onto my left foot in such a way that you can watch my left arch. Let me get closer to the camera. You can see, what does my left foot do? My arch rolls inward, and when it rolls inward, the distance, as it rolls inward, the distance from my metatarsal head to my heel, that distance gets longer. In other words, the tissue underneath is stretched, and it's trying to keep me upright. But the moment that I do that, the moment that I make that movement, then I start to have other spiraling movements within myself. That's one way of falling. Another way of falling is that I can make a movement in such a way that as I make the movement, that my foot stays relatively decent, but what I do is I go with my hip in such a way that I land outside of the highest point of my femoral head. I'm falling off the top of my pelvis. So now when I watched this athlete, what was interesting was that he fell to his inside arch and he fell off of his hip. Now, can you imagine what is happening in his groin the moment that all of his weight is now falling outside of the top of his hip joint with each step? Now, this is a guy, his high jump comes off of his left foot. That's the leg that he comes off of. But if he comes off of it with all the force and acceleration that he needs to go up and over a bar, and he lands, and for a microsecond, he does that, his ability to explode upward is going to be diminished. So the moment that he does that, and he has that moment in which he's fallen off of the top of his hip joint, all the effort that he's going to make is going to have to come out of the point in his groin that's trying to stabilize him from going out there. His groin is working like crazy to keep him over the top of his top of his finger. Now, until he finds how to land in such a way that when he lands, that he gets the exact lift through himself, so that the propulsion of force from his foot through his leg into his hip joint comes directly as a piston through the top of his head. Until he finds that, he'll always have a deficit, and he'll always be compensated, and he'll do whatever he can to make that up. Yeah? So what do I do with him? Now, I can't, obviously, don't have time here in a short talk like this, but we can see that we look for the deficit, and we can look to see where the clearest way is. Now, there are many other ways that people fall, and I'll just go through them real quickly, because people fall in the most interesting of ways. Whether you know it or not, can you see me? Now you don't know. Can you see the top of my head?
Yeah, you're good.
I'm good? So if I walk like this and I have a pretty nice sense of organization, but my head falls. Now, of course, as soon as my head falls, and then I must be, the weight of my head at this point in time, there must be some counteraction, because when my head falls, then I obviously have a lateral bend in my neck and some change in my ribs. So this side of myself is engaged. I can be relatively over the top of my hip joint, but I'm now not over my leg. I've fallen somewhere inside of my foot. So I'm not really over the top of myself. I can fall in all kinds of ways. I can fall in such a way that as I fall, there's a change in the way my shoulder drops. The moment I drop, then my weight then sinks. I don't have the relationship through myself. I can fall in such a way that I land, but when I land, I go, and you've seen this. You know people that walk this way. They walk in such a way that their torso is behind their hip joints. Clearly, I'm now hanging off of my hip joints. There's no way I can accelerate forward. I have to be organized in such a way that the back foot through my skeleton will drive me forward, so I can come away from the ground, not by pushing into the ground. I don't need to. My skeleton, when it has the proper architecture, the pressure that I've put into the ground already has an equal and opposite force. It'll drive me. So I don't need to have pushing into the ground. The force is already there when I've stepped on the ground. The foot-pounds of pressure I put into the ground are equalized by the force that rebounds back from the ground, and that's what will propel me forward. But if I take that step and I find myself hanging on my hip joints, that's falling. You can see that my shoulders have fallen back behind my skeleton. So the question then becomes to watch how many different ways can you watch people fall, and the ways that they have to stabilize themselves relative to the falling. Now, of course, in the process of working with this athlete, this is almost a real quote in which he said to me, I should get rid of my track coach, my sports psychologist, and my physical therapist. You've taught me more about how I can find the clarity of movement in myself than any of these other people that I've worked with for years. Now, again, this is not about me and it's not about that. But in the process of in working with him, what do you think happened to his sense of composure? As soon as he found this really deep sense of support in himself, his composure and quietness, mental activity, the sense of limbically becoming quiet in himself grew in a way where he went into the track meet that he was going to, that I first met him. He went into it with a kind of a calm presence that he said was new for him. He didn't go through his usual anxiety in the way that he prepared for the meet. At the meet, he jumped his second highest high jump ever, which I thought was pretty impressive. And I think he came in third in the meet, and I don't know that he got the necessary points he needed to qualify for the World Cup, but he did extraordinarily well for himself relative to the things that he was doing. And he came back and reported that most of the pain and difficulty in his groin had reduced significantly. So through all the training that he did, with the few couple sessions that we had, significantly altered the path through his skeleton that he could appreciate. So Linda, go ahead. I'm going to lower your hand and unmute you. Go ahead.
Jeff, I wasn't clear about seeing how he was falling to the outside of his hip. Like it looked like his pelvis was dropping in, so it looked like his pelvis was falling on the inside of his hip.
Okay, let me stand. If I do it from behind, it might be more clear for you. Let me just see.
Thanks.
I have to change the camera angle again. Okay, so I'll exaggerate it. Can you see my pelvis okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're okay? I'm going to be on my left leg, okay? So now, it looks like my pelvis is falling in, doesn't it? On the right side, it looks like my right side is caving in.
Yeah.
Right? My pelvis has translated out past the highest point of my hip joint. Now I'm on top of my hip joint. Now I've fallen to the inside, but I'm outside the most central line of my leg. The central line of my leg could, for example, be this stick. Now I'm outside the stick, aren't I?
Okay, I understand it from that perspective, yes.
Yeah?
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm clearly not on top of my hip joint. Yeah, if I was to exaggerate it in walking, I'd be out here. And you'll oftentimes see that when you're working with clients. You'll see on one side they'll go out, and on one side they'll be very, very clear in the way they come over themselves. And then you'll see that they go out and they come in over their leg. Here you can see I'm more or less over my leg. Now, there are many different patterns. You'll see people that'll turn easily over their leg, and they'll maintain themselves. They'll turn themselves. Now you can see I'm turned to the right. I bring my next foot to the right. I'm still turned to the right. So my ability to actually be able to stand on this foot and stand over my foot and to make the small subtle turns I need to be over this foot so that my whole system is continually finding where my skeleton comes most clearly up and into me, that has to be clarified, especially for someone who's at that level where his score is related to his time. And every single step is 100th of a second. And the more 100th of a second that he gains in every one of those competitions or how far he throws it makes a difference to his final score as to whether or not he's on the medal stand or not. Yeah? So we're dealing with the highest level of efficiency through a grueling 2 days. Yeah? So the question is how can you help the athlete find within themselves, or for the person who comes to you and who's had difficulty with walking, or or I can see Suzanne's here, De Stefano. She wants to sit on the seat of her horse in such a way that her two feet are in the stirrups in such a way that she's coming out of both legs through her spine so that she's at the highest point possible with the greatest clarity for working with her horse. So, Linda, does that help? I got you.
Yep.
Okay. Any other question?
Say one more thing. I'm
You might want to put you back on the regular. We can see your profile, Jeff, so you might want to change your angle again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There I am. Someone else have a comment or a question?
yes, I do. I'm currently working at a chamber camp. So this is my second week there, and some of the musicians are first-time Feldenkrais participants in
Yes.
high school range, and a lot of them have already compensated in their neck, their shoulders, their back, their spine, and this is giving me a lot of good ideas about what I could do the next couple days. So thank you.
Lindy, if you haven't, I teach a pretty nice ATM on sitting to standing. You can get it off my website, and it's a replication of the awareness of movement sitting to standing lesson with all the ramifications within it. And the question, Moshe asked the question, and you'll oftentimes see him in Alexandria and I and in Amherst, where he'll say, for example, if you're on your stomach and your hands are on the floor, or you're leaning and rolling, he'll say, don't lean on your hands. Your hands are not for leaning. Lift yourself away from the ground. Now, and a cellist who plays the piano or plays the cello in such a way that they're lifting themselves up from the floor into their hands will have a significantly different tone. Violinist, any of them. Moshe was famous for his work with Yehudi Menuhin. What did he do with Yehudi Menuhin before a particular studio recording session? He had him play standing on rollers. Yeah, he had him play where he had to have the highest point, the clearest point. And let me tell you how difficult it was, okay? Moshe had in his house turned wooden rollers, and he had rollers that were cardboard, that were thick-walled cardboard, where then he'd shellacked them. They were beautiful. They had a particular grain from the cardboard that the shellac brought out. They were beautiful rollers. But I can tell you, the office that Moshe worked in and the slate floor in his house, they were slate or concrete. The floor was concrete. There's no way in the world that concrete floor was flat. Now you take a roller that's that hard, and it's going to high center itself, isn't it? It's not going to be able to have the entire underside of the roller directly connected to the floor. So as you roll over parts of the floor that are high centered, of course, if you have a high center on the floor, that roller is going to want to twist underneath your foot. So it's not just rolling on the rollers, it's having to compensate over the rollers on an uneven surface that the roller is on. So that he could play the violin at the point of time, and of course with the roller, you have to be exactly over the most center line of the roller, don't you? And you can't fall into that. You have to be in the place where you're responsive. The only place you're responsive is at the highest center of gravity. Yeah? So when he got off the roller, he was lifted away from the ground. Now, when you read very carefully in the Awareness Through Movement book, he said, Moshe invites you to imagine yourself coming to standing in such a way that if you had a pair of scales under your feet, right foot and left foot, that you divide the weight and you don't go past your body weight. It means as soon as you come to stand, that you lift yourself from the ground. You cannot fall into the ground, and give yourself the sense of lightness. And Moshe says, good posture is the absence of unnecessary muscular contraction. Unnecessary muscular contraction is the process by which you keep yourself from falling. That's unnecessary contraction. Yeah? So what's the purest, most tonic, efficient way to come from standing in such a way that you lift yourself away from the floor? Yeah? So that would be extraordinarily helpful for your students if you can get them interested in how to find what it is to have the lightness of their skeleton, to have the movement come from their skeleton into their playing arm, rather than slumping and having to hold the weight of themselves and their playing. The quality of their sound will change dramatically.
We started the beginning of sitting just to give them a sense of how they organize in sitting in the preparation for standing. And pretty much all of them stopped their breath. They couldn't go, and it was at the end of the lesson, so I didn't continue. But this definitely gives me more ideas on how to continue. So that's great. Thank you.
Have a wonderful time.
Thanks.
Any last questions or observations? It's time for us to stop. Sue, do you have something you'd like to ask or say? I can't unmute you, Sue. You'll have to do it yourself.
I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
No, I don't actually. But I came in late. Sorry, I had an FI to do.
I'm so happy you had an FI to do. I hope you had plenty to do.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm happy too. We're working quite well together, and she does fall, and she's having difficulty staying on the ground or lifted. So this is quite enjoyable. Thank you. And the whole thing with the pain in the groin has hit home in terms of the people I work with. They have issues with knees, they have issues with hips, and I think this will be quite useful. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Connection with the center point. The other thing, Jeff, that I wanted to add with the alignment and using the groin and so on, I've recently discovered that a distant relative is going for the Mr. Olympia in September in Las Vegas, and he's already won the North American Championship in terms of bodybuilding. And I had a chance to watch some of the bodybuilders lift, and they certainly need this. And the other thing that he was told to do was take ballet.
Yeah.
He was more graceful on stage. And then I was able to give him my card and tell him that dancer go to Feldenkrais to become more graceful on stage.
Yeah, because their posing routines it's absolutely crucial that they have a quality of lightness in their posing process. That they're not thick, that they have all this density and muscle mass, but they have to be light in the presentation. Even though they're starved to death. They're down to 3 to 4% body fat, and they're almost at the point in time where they're going to have renal failure. But they only have to do that for just a few hours. But anyway.
Well, actually 3 days before the competition.
Yeah.
But and a few hours definitely, but they start 3 days. And just now, what is it, June? He's doing trial runs now, so he's starving himself to death now, just to make sure he's on the mark in September. So there. Anyway, that's just what I'm thinking while you're talking. And the groin pain is very common.
Right.
With the hiking of the hip, as you demonstrated, the hip actually goes up, and it creates pain in the groin.
Right.
So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming to this brief discussion of RG, and he's a lovely, delightful person, and again, I hope it showed a little bit about how we can help people with physical integrity relative to the functions that they are trying to accomplish for themselves, to help them with recover from injury and then to move themselves into a much finer state of organization. So thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, and just a final thank you. And of course, if you know of anybody who'd be interested in Feldenkrais Training Academy, the upcoming training, would love for you to pass it on. I'm going to throw it into the chat right now. So.
Oh yeah, I'm supposed to be advertising the training program. You can see where my interest is. But by the way, just to let you guys know, I mean, obviously, you know, Lisa's been with me, and several of the other people, Suzanne, and several of you have been with me in the past in different programs. And you know that these biomechanical details are very, very important to me in the sense of supporting practitioners understand this as a part of the practice. Not to say that it's the whole practice, but understanding this as part of the practice. So If you do know people that would be interested in training and want to work with people in their own personal transformation and physical integrity, emotional dignity, and health, we're starting in October, and we're open to receive applicants. So
yeah, and one more thing, there's been a series of talks. If you're interested in past talks, I also put in the chat the link for the to get to past talks.
all right.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Nice to see you, Donna. Thanks, Anna. Nice to have you here. Nice to have all of you here. Take care.
Mm-hmm.